Good evening and welcome to the final in a three-part series, Human Trafficking and Forced Labor, an introduction to the problem, those fighting it, and what you can do. We've convened this spring 2021 semester at the University of Notre Dame, virtually via Zoom for several Thursday evenings in February, March, and April. Tonight, we're going to focus on what people at Notre Dame are doing and what you can do to help the fight against human trafficking. In our prior discussions, we've spent some time back in February looking at what the nature of the problem is and gaining an introduction and a good footing in what the causes and business sense of human trafficking is and why it's so hard to eradicate. In March, we spent some time looking at what various responses are to the problem of human trafficking by seeing what business, government, law enforcement, education, victim leadership, and advocacy are doing in response to the problem. So tonight we take a turn to what's going on at Notre Dame. And before I turn you over to the program, I want to just take a moment to thank all of our co-sponsors. First, my name is Phil White. I'm one of a group of alumni and friends of Notre Dame who a year ago came together to form a group called Imago Dei, which is the Notre Dame response to human trafficking. We've been co-sponsoring this program with Dan Graff of the Higgins Labor Program, which is a unit of the Center for Social Concerns that's devoted to research, advocacy, and outreach on labor questions, using the lens of Catholic social teaching as a way to frame their efforts. I also am happy to say that we've been co-sponsored by the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership at Mendoza College of Business. The Deloitte Center provides programming, research, and insights to help leaders develop integrity and to create effective organizations that contribute to a just and humane society. Tonight, Brett Beasley, who's the Associate Director of the Center, will lead the discussion. And I want to take a brief moment also to thank Judy Benchar and the host of others at the Center for Social Concerns who have helped make this program a huge success. So for tonight's discussion, I'm glad to say that I'm going to turn it over to Brett, who will lead us in talking about what it is happening at Notre Dame in the fight against human trafficking and what others can do to join the fight. Brett?
Thanks so much, Phil, and thank you all for joining us. Before we turn it over to our presenters tonight, I wanted to offer some brief introductions, and then each of them will be able to offer a short presentation, and then we'll have time for lots of discussion and questions and answers. So joining us first, we have two of our alumni from the Mendoza College of Business. First is Mark Schroeder. Mark Schroeder is part of the Strategic Leadership Development Program at Edwards Life Sciences, a post-MBA rotational program focused on strategy marketing within the organization. Mark completed his MBA last year at Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business with concentrations in marketing and strategy. During his time at Notre Dame, Mark was a member of the Business on the Front Lines program, which we'll hear more about in a few minutes. Prior to receiving his MBA, Mark graduated from USC with a bachelor's in business administration and marketing and worked in a variety of industries, including advertising and financial services, focused in sales and account management. So thanks for joining us, Mark. And along with Mark, we will be hearing from Aaron Birbasi. Aaron is a strategy and transactions consultant at EY Parthenon. Aaron is also an MBA grad from the Mendoza College of Business. She graduated with concentrations in finance and strategy. During her time in the Business on the Front Lines program, Aaron served a global partner in a semester-long consulting project with contacts in London and Romania to find innovative strategies to increase social welfare across schools in Romania. She graduated with a bachelor's in finance with a certificate of personal and organizational leadership from the University of Georgia in 2016. So I'll turn it over to Mark and Aaron for our first presentation.
Thanks so much, Brett. And we're really happy to be here. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about a really difficult subject. Both Aaron and I were part of the Business on the Front Lines program. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen really quickly and pull up a few slides. Great. So as I mentioned, Aaron and I were a part of the Business on the Front Lines program, along with our teammates, Rachel Emmerich, Jaron Amelka, and Christopher Udall. I believe Christopher Udall is actually a current second-year MBA, finishing up his time at Notre Dame as well. And for many of you, if you don't know what the Business on the Front Lines program is, it's specific to the Mendoza College of Business MBA program. And it's a program that focuses on working with partners in areas of post-conflict or extreme poverty and helping them find business solutions to their situations and to help the communities around them. And so it's a program, I think I got paused. There we go. Can you guys see my screen still?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great.
We're still on the first page though, Mark.
Oh, got it. Okay. Let's see if I can fix that. There's our team. And so part of the Business on the Front Lines program focuses on many different aspects. And I think Aaron will talk a little bit about our project in Romania that I have up right now in a moment here. But I guess for myself, the Business on the Front Lines program was a huge draw for me to come to Notre Dame in the MBA program. It's a very unique opportunity that is unique among MBA programs in the country. And so it was a wonderful experience, and we got to work with a wonderful client and partner in Romania. And I think if you bear with me, I'm going to skip through a few of our slides here. And I want to point out two specific slides. First is during our project in Romania, we focused on a lot of pre-travel human trafficking research. We sorted through many articles, and we actually, one of our teammates modeled South Bend trafficking ring as well to give us kind of a base idea of what is human trafficking, where is it occurring, what are the pain points, what are the drivers of this industry, we'll call it. And then we also leveraged some previous Botful program as well. Specifically, Botful 8 engaged in also a human trafficking project in the Philippines, and they had some really unique insights to draw from that project. And so we leveraged a lot of their work as well. What we found, at least at the bottom here of the slide that you'll see is through our pre-research, we found that this was kind of our initial value chain that we had the assumption of before we went to Romania. So the chain, as we saw it, was there was a recruiter, a handler, a transporter, a holder, and a client. And our goal in going to Romania and working with our partner was to test this value chain and understand, are these the right steps in the value chain? Where is there a pain point? Where is there an area that we might be able to impact and provide real insight with our partner to help combat this horrible thing? And so we had a few initial estimates of how big the sex trafficking industry was from a business perspective. But I think, as you'll see shortly here when we share another piece of our work, it's quite a bit bigger than we first imagined as well. Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Mark mentioned, we did have a very cursory view of what the value chain was going to look like, and very, very quickly realized that it is far more complex and much more of a web than we could have really even imagined. We actually were able to conduct a handful of interviews with professors, people in the nonprofit space, people at the US Embassy, which was incredible, actually alums of the program. And actually Mark and some other of our teammates were able to speak with some current members of this tragic industry. So we really did see a lot of different pieces come out of all of those interviews that I don't think anybody in our team would have been able to get to without these on the ground interviews. And I mean, as I'm sure everybody can imagine, it's really tragic, but was really enlightening. That one of the things that really stuck out to us in some of our interviews was that, at least in Romania, some of the views is that about half of the members of parliament are either participants, or the other chunk is like have a financial stake in this industry. So whether they're consumers or providers in terms of the financial side. It is rife with a lot of different interactions that aren't exactly prone to wanting to actually stop this really horrible industry. So, Mark, do we want to move on unless you had anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I think just to kind of provide a little bit of a transition. So I think this was a lot of our pre-work and our work in Romania, these on-the-ground interviews that Aaron talked about and some of the insights we came with. And so when we came back to Notre Dame after our time in Romania, we spent about 2 weeks in Romania. After our time, when we came back, we sat down with our professor and we thought, okay, what is the biggest value that we can provide our client and our partner? And I think what we settled on was obviously a myriad of things, but one of the more important ones was creating and trying to help our partner understand how large is this network, what's involved, how much money is being moved, and how profitable is it for these people that are engaged in this industry. It's a tough question to answer and to explore. And I think Aaron and I both had a tough time building what we're about to show you. But I think one of the big things that we created was this Excel model. And I'll stop sharing for a second so I can switch to that.
We won't go too deep into the model, but we were able to explore a variety of different scenarios. So whether it be a typical massage parlor, house calls, and then street workers, both in urban and rural settings. So I would focus your attention on the top left corner. So our gross and net revenue projections were all driven by these various scenarios. We were able to, through a lot of quite intense research, provide an estimate of an average in terms of all of these different scenarios, from number of victims and through all of the different, how many networks there would be, and then within all of that, and it's a very complex model, so don't want to get too deep into it, but really understanding all of the things that go into the supply chain, which is a really tough way to think about this, but it was kind of the only way that we could compartmentalize for the sake of building this model, and then bring the human side back to it of what does this actually show us? So it's a massive industry. We're seeing, based on our estimates and some reporting that we had seen, we're seeing that about 35,000 victims live in Romania, but that does not even cover the gambit of those that might be trafficked through Romania or any of those additional scenarios. That is, we think, on the low end, but wanted to provide a view into what we think is a reasonable projection into why this is such a profitable industry, and why, because it is so profitable, it doesn't seem that anybody is really all that interested in making a change and stopping any of those horrible events. So we also, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to add on, I think, this slide or this tab provides you with like an overall market size and projection. And I think some of the back end work that we did that was really valuable to our partner as well were on some of these other tabs down here, where we focused on, from the victim's perspective, breaking down, how much money is generated per day, where does that money go, what is that split between those that house the victims or take the victims, and each of these tabs provide a very detailed level and understanding. Granted, they are heavily assumption-based and research-based, but they provide our partner with a way to look at this industry in a much more pragmatic way and try and understand, okay, here are the people that are benefiting, and so how do we combat that? And here are the people that are victims, and how do we help those people in this industry? And it's so just to piggyback off what Aaron was saying, it was difficult to go through these different tabs, but all of these tabs and P&Ls, for lack of a better word, profit and loss statements, they feed back into this market size projection. And so everything kind of rolls up into this one tab. But you can just get an understanding of the gross revenue and also the total Romanian net profit. And that's just in Romania, which is one country amongst many countries in Eastern Europe that has an issue with human trafficking. And so just in one country, you can see just the sheer size of it in terms of dollar amount. It was pretty shocking for Aaron and myself when we were working through this, just to see the volume.
It's a kind of pairing of the actual revenue that's coming in and the gross margin. I think in any other scenario, in sorts of like business cases, you'd say, oh, this is a 46% margin. This is great. Like, how do we continue to do this? Which is exactly why this is becoming, or continues to be, such a problem, and people don't have any intentions of stopping. I think that we had seen some interesting concepts and stats from the US Embassy in Romania that they're seeming to want to, the US Embassy is doing as much work as they can, but it's really up to, at least for when we were there about a year ago, there was money going to these, supposedly going to these different efforts to fight trafficking, but whether or not it actually flowed all the way to serving the victims was another story. So I think that we're kind of up on time, but looking forward to hearing everybody else's presentations and looking forward to any questions that this group may have.
Yeah, and I think just to finish up, that was a small portion of a lot of the work that we did and a lot of the work that our teammates did. And I would encourage anyone on the call who has additional questions, feel free to reach out to those who are working in the BOTFL program right now. I believe it's Viva Barkis, Joe Sweeney, and Kelly Ruby. And they're all great contacts, and I'm sure would be interested in talking to anyone who's interested in helping about those topics. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Mark and Aaron. And if you do have questions for Mark and Aaron, go ahead and feel free to use the Q&A tool. And after we have our sort of initial presentations, we'll move to a Q&A time. So thanks so much. And now we are very delighted to be able to turn things over to one of our current students. Ella Wood is a senior at Notre Dame, originally from Arlington, Virginia. She is double majoring in the program of liberal studies and viola performance, with a minor in the Glenn Honors Program. Throughout her time at Notre Dame, she has focused her energies on working in civic education and advocacy, from founding and leading the Notre Dame chapter of the International Justice Mission, to interning for the Supreme Court of the United States, to serving on Notre Dame's Student Trademark Licensing and Human Rights Committee. After graduation, Ella plans to pursue a master's in education with Notre Dame's Alliance for Catholic Education. So Ella, we will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Brett. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight. So let me set up my share screen really quickly. Okay. So like Brett said, I founded and currently lead Notre Dame's chapter of International Justice Mission. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what it takes to mobilize college students in the fight against trafficking. So Ijm is the world's largest anti-trafficking organization, and they focus on rescue, aftercare, and prevention. They have 17 different field offices throughout South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and they've seen major successes in partnering with local governments and lawyers to help end the plight of the 40 million people currently trapped in trafficking situations. One recent example of this is their work in the Philippines. They saw an 80% reduction in child cyber sex trafficking in the space of just 10 years. So the Ijm theory is that violence in every form decreases when criminal justice systems focus on protecting the poor and vulnerable. So Ijm campus chapters are teams of college students based mostly in the US, whose job is to educate their fellow students about the issues surrounding trafficking and mobilize them to action through fundraising and advocacy. I'll talk more about what this looks like later on in the presentation, but right now I want to look specifically at the situation on most college campuses in the US. So we talk a lot about numbers in terms of victims, and those statistics are absolutely crucial in terms of helping us understand the scope of the problem of trafficking. But here's one number that you won't often see, based off of calculations from our research with Notre Dame students and statistics from other universities. Only 7% of college students say that they feel comfortable discussing the issue of trafficking or know how they can take concrete action to help. So if there are many causes behind human trafficking, there have to be many solutions as well. But the first among them is absolutely awareness. If no one knows about a problem, there's going to be no way to solve it. So with that said, let's dig behind that 7% number. Why don't college students know more or act more? College students, by virtue of their position in life, are often overcommitted, and this is especially the case at academically rigorous institutions like Notre Dame, and they often choose to invest in one social justice cause, forgetting that they're all connected. And beyond this, it's just plain uncomfortable to bring up or talk about sex trafficking, especially if it's a subject you don't know much about in the first place. So both of these things can lead to apathy, so that students just don't feel like it's an issue that they can help with at all. So our job as a campus chapter is to find ways for students to engage without committing a ton of time and give them the knowledge they need to understand and gain confidence. And for the apathy bit, it doesn't stem from a lack of care. It really stems from a feeling of impotence in the face of such a large problem. And while we can't teach empathy, we can counter apathy by showing how easy it is to help. So here is what we like to call the cycle of engagement. I'm going to go through each of these three in more detail, beginning with teaching, and talk about both the main question that each participant asks at each stage, but then rather than providing a straight up answer to that question, I'm going to talk about an outcome, what results look like, and that keeps pushing us forward. And it becomes really just about taking the next right step. So beginning with teaching, the question at this very first stage is, what do I need to know? We're talking basic facts, etc. Here it's about distilling the information so that you can understand trafficking, the what, the why, the how, and the how many. Facts like the ones in that graphic on the left there are rarely talked about outside of very specific circumstances, so it's important to present them very regularly. Most of the time, the most effective way to convey this information is going to be through social media. It's quick, it's easily packaged, and while it can't explain everything, it draws people in by meeting them where they're at. The outcome in these circumstances is pretty obvious. You get informed students who can say that they regularly engage with these issues, even if it's only through social media, and sustained interaction with it breeds not only knowledge, but the desire for action as well. So before moving on to grand movements of advocacy, however, you need to move to the next step, which is awareness. So awareness tends to be the first step of action, and it happens on the individual level as you learn to understand your own impact. Then the question here that you're asking is, how do my actions impact this system? For our campus chapter, we focus on teaching students small ways to help, such as paying attention to what companies they shop with, staying away from fast fashion, and also encouraging them to look into what their local representatives' positions are on these global issues. When you start with this individual level, you realize pretty quickly, as you can see in the graphic, that things really are connected. There's a lot you can do on your own, but once you know, A, that this is an issue, and B, that there are others who care about this issue, awareness will expand pretty quickly to advocacy. So advocacy works on a much larger, or action is the third stage, works on a much larger and more collective scale, where we envision the changes we want to see and realize that when we work as a team, we can actually implement these changes. So the questions that we're asking at this stage are, what can I do and how can I talk to others about this? Advocacy typically involves reaching out to those with resources, whether it's fundraising on campus or talking to members of Congress. And for on-campus fundraising, we really try to meet people where they're at. For example, one of our most successful fundraisers last year was an event called Puppies for Freedom. We partnered with a local animal shelter to offer students the chance to spend time with some of the dogs, and proceeds were split between Ijm and the animal shelter, so it was really a win-win situation. We timed it right before finals week, and it went perfectly, an amazing partnership where we were able to combine pet therapy with a passion for combating injustice. So when it comes to advocacy with Congress members, we find that this is an amazing opportunity for people to really utilize their knowledge and heart for justice. Looking at that graphic, you can see all the different places in the justice pipeline where resources are needed to fix these things. And as people are learning about this and learning how to talk to their representatives about it, you're combining that knowledge and power of citizenship. So they're gaining confidence, they're in this civic education situation, they're learning more about the process of lawmaking and when and where citizens can have an impact. So again, that graphic on my screen right now shows what funds from Congress can do in terms of fixing the criminal justice system at every point in the pipeline. And again, just to hammer it home, the best way to learn a subject is to teach it. So you can see that the line between advocacy and that first stage of teaching begins to blur here as well. So I'm coming to the end of my time here, but to conclude the presentation, I've got some numbers on the right there that demonstrate what we've been able to do in our 4 years as a club on campus. We've raised just about $10,000. We've helped students contact almost 200 of the various members of Congress. And we've had about 50% of the undergraduate population engage with our club and the issue of trafficking. And by engagement, we mean coming to events somewhat regularly. So this is tremendous progress, and we've learned a lot over the years, but the most important thing is really the takeaway I want everyone to take from this session. It's a reason for hope. College students really do care, and the more they can learn right now, the better advocates the world will have in a few years. So with that, I will go ahead and conclude my presentation and pass things back to Brett. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Ella. If you have questions for Ella about anything that she talked about, go ahead and feel free to also put those down in the Q&A tool for us. And we will move on, last but certainly not least, to our very own Tommy Gerhold. Tommy is the Director of Licensing here at Notre Dame. She joined the university in the year 2000 and became Director for the Licensing Department in 2017. She is responsible for managing the university's Trademark licensing program, which was established in the early 1980s to protect and control the use of Notre Dame's trademarks. She also serves on the university's Trademark Licensing and Human Rights Committee and chairs the Licensee/Factory Assessment Subcommittee. She earned her bachelor's degree from Bethel College, majoring in organizational management. She serves on the Fair Labor Association's Board of Directors and is a member of the International Collegiate Licensing Association. So please join me in welcoming Tommy Gerhold.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate you having me tonight. So I apologize, I don't have any fancy slides like everyone else. But I do want to talk a little bit about what licensing is, what we do, and particularly how it connects to this series on human trafficking and forced labor, and more broadly, how the licensing program supports the university's mission. So as Brett mentioned, I've been with the university for 20 years, all within the licensing department, becoming the director in 2017. We're a very small department of only two, myself and my assistant director, Katie Dittmer. So as you can imagine, we stay very busy, but we also contract with an outside licensing agency who handles a lot of the administrative work, like licensing contracts, processing royalty reports and payments, and et cetera. But the licensing department is ultimately responsible for managing the commercial use of the university's registered trademarks in order to generate revenue in support of the overall academic mission of the university. We also assist in the prevention of the unauthorized use of university trademarks, so battling the counterfeiters. And more related to what we're talking about today, we do ensure that Notre Dame licensed products are manufactured under acceptable working conditions, upholding the university's mission to be a force for good in the world through our commitment to ethical sourcing and our corporate responsibility efforts. But just to be clear, Notre Dame does not directly manufacture anything, and we don't have direct relationships with any factories. We license companies or brands like Under Armour or Champion, for example, to manufacture Notre Dame branded product. So it's the companies or licensees that have the direct relationships with the factories. And in some cases, licensees own their own factories, but in most cases, they're contracting with the factories to produce the goods. So it's ultimately the licensee's responsibility to ensure ongoing compliance with our code of conduct at the factory level. I'll come back to that in a minute and talk about some of the challenges that we face with that work. but also talk about some of the great accomplishments. But let me step back a bit and share a little Notre Dame licensing history. We were one of the first universities to establish a formal licensing program in 1983. We have always been regarded as an industry leader when it comes to corporate responsibility. And in 1997, we were one of the first universities to adopt a labor code of conduct. In 1999, we became one of the founding members of the Fair Labor Association, and we joined the Workers' Rights Consortium in 2001. Today, we continue as active members of both the FLA and the WRC. And most recently, I was elected to serve on the Fair Labor Association's board of directors. So let me go back. So we rely on our licensees to ensure ongoing compliance with our code of conduct within their factories. The challenge is, how do we really know this is happening, right? So first, we're very intentional about what companies we choose to license. It needs to be a true partnership. Our licensees have to share in our commitment to improving the lives of workers, and there needs to be a high level of trust. However, while we trust, we must also verify. So there are several ways that we hold our licensees accountable. We require all of our licensees to affiliate with the Fair Labor Association. Through this affiliation, they have to disclose all of their factories, and the FLA, through independent external assessors, randomly audit approximately 5% of disclosed factories each year. And licensees are required to complete quarterly continuous education e-learning series that help them better understand the importance of responsible sourcing. And then we've also partnered with Sumera, a global compliance company, to facilitate two separate programs that we require our licensees to participate in. First is the Sustainable Manufacturing Assessment Questionnaire, or SMAC program, which is a self-assessment that measures the quality and depth of a licensee's overall corporate responsibility program. And then secondly, the Ethical Supplier Engagement Program, or ESEP, which was created to ensure factories that produce university licensed product are regularly monitored and compliant with university codes of conduct and local laws. So we're evaluating both our licensee with the SMAC and each factory with the ESEP. I can tell you that we're very proud of the program that we've built. It receives support at the highest level from Father Jenkins, as well as the internal Trademark Licensing and Human Rights Committee. But we also recognize that, we don't know what we don't know, right? There will always be room for continuous improvement, not only at the factory level, but within our licensees' programs and within our own program. So, the factory assessment process, for example, is extremely complex. And as we started to really lean into this and require audits within all factories, we had to acknowledge a few things. That there are no perfect factories, and with every audit, there will be findings that need to be corrected. The issue becomes more about how severe are the findings, how much leverage does the licensee have within the factory to affect changes, and how committed is factory management to making those changes. And there will always be supply chain challenges that come up. Some, more severe than others. Some will require immediate action, whether it be something like the tragedy at Rana Plaza in 2013 that shed light on, the serious structural issues facing factories in Bangladesh, or today, the issue in the Western Xinjiang region of China that's uncovered forced labor at factories in and around Chinese internment camps in that region. So these are very serious issues that can't be fixed, overnight, or that can't be fixed by any one company, organization, or university. The entire industry needs to come together. And I think we've seen that happen. In fact, I've seen more industry collaboration around the Xinjiang issue than ever before. It's a global issue that has required a global response. I want to be mindful of the time. So let me just close by saying that Notre Dame's licensing department and the university as a whole is committed to making a difference in the lives of factory workers around the world and upholding the Catholic mission of the university. And we'll continue to work on building partnerships with our licensees, other universities, and organizations that share our same commitment.
Thanks so much, Tommy. So at this time, we'll move to Q&A. And if you had any lingering questions for any of our presenters, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A tool. And I have a few prepared questions that I'll ask. And I guess this first one is really open to the whole group, but I'll ask, I guess, first Aaron and Mark. We had a clarification question come through, maybe you can answer this too, that pertained to who was your client or partner, if you're able to disclose that. But the question pertains to the fact that doing the kind of work that you do, you mentioned a couple times the discomfort of having to be thinking about a problem that is such a heart-wrenching problem, and yet having to analyze it through dollars and cents on a spreadsheet. And I think that this might play out in other ways in some of the other presentations. How do you think about the tension between thinking about the spreadsheet, the numbers, the graphs and charts, and the statistics, and without losing the kind of human element involved?
Mark, go first.
Sure. To be totally honest, the first question, I don't know if we can disclose exactly who the partner was, because one, I'm not sure if they're still doing the work they're currently doing in the current areas, and two, I'm not sure if they are officially involved in anything in country. I think they're trying to work a little bit behind the scenes given the government landscape. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to provide exactly who the partner is. But again, if you wanted to reach out to some of the current thoughtful program, they may have different rules now. And then I guess to answer your second question, I think it's really interesting. As I mentioned when I was showing that Excel sheet, Aaron and I probably spent like 4 hours a day for 5 days building that document, and definitely cried once or twice. And just because of the nature of the things that you're researching, some of the things you have to type into a web browser, I think you're like, wow, I had never thought I would type that into a web browser in my life, nor want to read what is the output of that search. And so I think at least for me, it was just putting it into a frame of mind of, in order to solve a problem, you have to understand every angle of a problem. And I think there's a lot of work that's done on how can we help victims when they've become victims. And I think if you want to impact maybe earlier in that process to help prevent them from being victims, you have to look at a problem through a different lens. And sometimes that lens might be kind of messy. And you just have to understand that. And for me too, I think, like, personally, I have a little sister who's quite a bit younger than me. And I would never want her to experience anything like that, obviously. And so I think it was kind of like a mission for myself of like, I'm trying to help people, people like this, that fit a demographic very close to me. And so I think that helped maybe provide a little bit of drive throughout the process as well. But that's just from my perspective, Aaron. I don't know from your perspective.
Yeah, thankfully, Mark and I are very good friends. So being able to lean on each other through that really intense, both time in country and in building this tool was, at least for me, like super critical to be able to have someone who I knew that was going through the exact same thing as me. And yeah, I think that it was incredibly challenging, but like Mark said, from my experience, a lot of the focus had been how do we help reintroduce victims once they've escaped, or that lens. And it might have been my naive mindset going into this, but I think that then trying to take as much of an analytical lens and saying like, okay, this is obviously an incredibly emotional and terrible tragedy that is occurring, but if I need to solve a problem, like the emotional side of the story is incredibly easy to sell on, like why this needs to be stopped, but then being able to provide that additional lens of, okay, yes, we all agree that this is horrific and it needs to have a lot of focus and needs to be stopped, like, but how do we provide that additional level of, okay, so here's why it is not getting as much attention. Like you get the emotional side, but what is the actual policy, or like how do we get the money to go to the right parties to actually make things stop? So like Mark said, it was very challenging, but to try as hard as I could to put it in a different lens and be analytical during the actual working in the model, and still kind of going back now and looking at it and thinking about it. And then when you tell the story to the people that you're speaking to, that's when you can kind of pull in those hard data facts and layer it with the story to really drive the point home of why it should be stopped. So it was a tough one, but that was my approach.
Thanks. Ella and Tommy, did you have any thoughts about how that kind of tension shows up at all in any of what you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, from a licensing standpoint, we deal with the same, struggle, because, we are charged with generating revenue, right? Unrestricted funds that go back to the university. And we are, one of the largest revenue generating units on campus. So, but at the same time, we want to make sure that, the product that's being manufactured to generate this revenue is being manufactured in a way that, recognizes human rights and protects the workers within the factory. And so with that, we often have to make some difficult decisions. And, whether it be walking away from a particular company that might be, producing some, nice quality product that's selling well, but they don't have a handle on what's happening at the factory level, we can't take that risk of being, represented in that factory. So we may have to walk away knowing that we're going to walk away from revenue. So yeah, it is a struggle for sure.
I would add that the student perspective can actually be really helpful in these cases, because we're not coming at it from a research perspective or from a licensing perspective. We're allowed to lean into the emotional side of it and really touch people's hearts as well as their minds in terms of looking behind the statistics, a lot of our most successful campaigns have been narrative based, where we're focusing on specific individuals telling their stories, and those are often hugely emotionally impactful. And that is how we draw students into the club, is by explaining that this is not just an issue of numbers, it's a people issue at its heart. So I think that's where students, again, are really necessary in this, because we have that liberty to look at the more emotional side of things, even as we're explaining research as well.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I think, a related question has to do with what disciplines are at the table and who might be missing. So I think we're seeing a really interesting example of the business toolkit and mindset may not always show up enough. There may be other disciplinary perspectives and ways of approaching the problem. So, and I think all of you to some degree talked about the value of different kinds of partnerships. So I wonder if you could speak to the value that you've seen through different kinds of partnerships, and who might be kind of missing from the table that we need more of a different way of thinking.
I can tackle that one first, maybe. But I think it's been really great for me as a campus chapter leader to see involvement from two very different ends of campus. One is the Mendoza College. We've seen a lot of young business professionals really concerned about the issue of trafficking and how they can help. And we've also seen a lot from the like the Catholic social tradition group on campus, and working with campus ministry has also been amazing. In terms of who's missing from the table, I would love to see more from especially sustainability, and that's a partnership that's essentially waiting to happen, because a lot of these ethical issues involving labor trafficking or similar issues also involve issues of climate, and how we're making sure that we're ethically involved in sustainability as well. Again, there's a lot of interrelated issues when it comes to climate and poverty, and I think we're seeing more and more of that focus, especially with papal encyclicals like Laudato Si. But again, that's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing more of in the future.
I think maybe just to touch on our project a little bit more. One of the interesting partnerships that I was expecting maybe, but didn't receive, or at least didn't see in our project, was the partnership with government. There was a hesitancy, not on our government side, on the Romanian government side. There was a hesitancy to really tackle this issue head on. I think everyone we talked to that was associated with the government, whether they were in some type of parliamentary role or some type of local government role, they were aware of the issue and were open and said, yes, this is a problem. We understand. It's widespread. It's bad. We don't like it. And then when the question came of, okay, well, we'd like to engage with you to create programs or help, build things from the ground up for these victims, and to combat this issue in more on the sex trafficking side versus the general human trafficking side, but combat that earlier in the process. It was like hands off, right? It was like, oh no, we can't do that. We can't do anything officially, and I was quite surprised at that. I think the U.S. Embassy, like Aaron mentioned, does a lot of good work, and at some points has their hands tied, right? They can only issue so many sanctions and fines and things like that to the Romanian government to influence. But at some point it has to come from the ground, right? And so I was a little bit interested or disappointed, I guess, when we had those conversations, and I would like to see that partner be more prevalent at the table somehow.
I think a related question then, it concerns the role of law and policy. So in your work, to what degree do you hope for better laws and better guidance for legal compliance that would help with this issue, versus maybe in a lot of what you do, it's sort of going beyond compliance or not waiting for the law? How do you think about the relationship there? I imagine that, Tommy, this probably that your work touches on this topic a fair amount, especially in international contexts where laws might be quite a bit different depending on the different nations you're operating in.
You know, we're dealing right now, and Dan knows a lot. Dan Graff certainly knows a lot about this. Reviewing and revising our labor code of conduct. But one of the things, you know, that we have to consider is, you know, we have our own local, you know, laws, but a lot of the production of the licensed product is happening in many different countries that have their own local laws, right? And so how do we craft a labor code of conduct that covers everything? And because we do expect that our licensees will align with our code of conduct, and it is our code of conduct that's used and all the elements of that code to assess the factories when we do audits. They're comprehensive audits that, you know, that cover all of those elements of our code. So it is challenging for sure. But I think what we've seen, particularly with what we did on the side of China, and when we removed ourselves from China back in 1999, 2000, we thought that we may have an impact, and we didn't. We thought we might make a difference, and we didn't. The bottom line is we're one small university, and we alone will never have an impact on a country like China and their laws. We'll never be able to affect their laws as an individual institution. So.
Okay, thanks. Aaron, Mark, or Ella, did you have any thoughts on that, the law and its limits?
I guess one other thing that we also saw at the U.S. Embassy, and I touched on it a little bit, was the sanctions that they can put on different countries. And I'm forgetting the list, but there's basically a list of countries where they assess their ability and willingness to combat human trafficking. Again, I'm forgetting the name of the list, but they have the 3 different tiers, and countries move down tiers if they are, not combating it successfully or not creating laws successfully. And so I think Romania had moved up a tier maybe a few years before we got there, but they were in danger of moving it down a tier. And I guess the theory is that if you stay at the bottom tier for too many consecutive years, then it's like really heavy penalties. And I think that process sounds great and it sounds interesting, but in practice it didn't have much impact. And I think it's an effort that, again, looks good on paper, but I think there could be a little bit more punch to that because the countries that stayed at the bottom of the list stayed at the bottom of the list forever. Not many move from the bottom to the top of the list. So I think there could be maybe some additional work either the embassy or partnerships in that sense that could do. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, and I can hop in as well. I think that one of the other things that we saw is that a lot of the time people in Romania government adjacent areas said, I think that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're sending money to the right channels. We're trying to do as much as they could to essentially check a box to try to not be on that tier 2 sanction list, but it wasn't necessarily impactful. So yes, they might be checking the box of what the law or the guidance says, but it isn't necessarily trickling down to that actual social change. So I think it is a little bit more complex than just saying we're going to make this change in policy. And I think it is a matter of probably both a change in policy and people willing to kind of take the matter of the heart and the matter of these people and like step up and make a change, whether or not it's within the line of checking a box, but rather going above and beyond.
Thanks. And so, Ella, I don't know how much you feel that your organization focuses on advocacy for changing particular laws, or not worrying about pushing the law forward, but rather using, it sounded like you talked about, consumer behavior, influencing consumer behavior to address the problem. How do you think about those different avenues?
Yeah, I would say we do try to do some level of advocacy with Congress, because every spring, obviously, Congress is working on their budget. So we often talk about whatever law is in process at that point. So we've had several members of our club actually attend advocacy sessions and talk with Congress members on the Hill in DC whenever they're having those sessions. So setting up meetings with that. It's great as a student experience to get used to, again, the power of citizenship. And it's also really helpful so that you can see what the limits are in this case. When you're talking about foreign aid, there's a lot of questions to be had there, a lot of conversations surrounding that. But we're really pushing a bipartisan approach, which we think is really helpful in that case. So the limits of the law, we're usually working with whatever law is in process. Obviously, we're not drafting anything or making suggestions beyond what Congress is already thinking about. But we are there to show kind of the power of the people in the cliche sense, I guess. But really showing like students care about this. There are a lot of people behind these causes. I think from the other side too, it does become kind of an individual choice. Like, who are you supporting? Not just in terms of your representatives, but also in terms of the companies that you're supporting. So for us, because we take an international focus as well as a local focus, we try to encourage students, again, to really stay away from fast fashion. That can be hard. A lot of companies like Forever 21, very popular, but obviously are really terrible in terms of the labor practices that they endorse. So that, again, like focusing on conscious consumerism and conscious citizenship, I would say, are the two main approaches we try to take.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. So I have one last question before we open it up to audience questions. So we've heard a lot of good things about the positive momentum in addressing this problem here at Notre Dame. If you had to say one way you think Notre Dame could do better on this issue, maybe something that people aren't thinking about, courses you think that ought to be offered, research that you think needs to be done. There's so many capabilities here at the university. Where would you like to see more work in this area?
Well, I would certainly love to see there be more classes available for students, focusing on what we do in licensing, and at the factory level, the audit process, the assessments that take place, but in general, the ethical sourcing classes that deal with supply chains and the challenges that go along with supply chains from a human rights standpoint.
I would absolutely echo that. I think the more opportunities that Notre Dame as an institution can offer beyond just clubs and extracurriculars would be great. I know there have been previous collaborations between student groups and between the licensing committee, for instance. And I'd love to see more of that too, where you're having students involved at every level possible. Because if there are these opportunities, students will absolutely take them.
I think for me, and maybe this is just because I've focused a little bit on the business school. It's my only experience at Notre Dame. Unfortunately, I only had 2 years there, but I do think, and there's an effort underway, I think there's an opportunity for, especially students in the business program, obviously in my experience in the MBA program, to partner with other colleges in the school or in the university. I know we have a number of different programs that tackle human rights activism and other types of activism. And I'd like to see more business students get involved in those types of projects. I think, in business school, we can get a little hyper-focused on how do we make a company more money? And that's, important and rewarding in certain ways. But at the same time, I think we have an interesting set of skills as business students in terms of looking at problems analytically, in terms of critical thinking in a different perspective than maybe some students in other programs have, and then vice versa. Other students from other programs have a unique way of thinking about problems as well. And I think we can cross collaborate a little bit better between programs. And like I said, I think it's already underway in some circumstances with the BOTFL program for sure. I know that, but I think on a larger scale, it'd be more unique to get a group of people who think about problems differently and have different skills. Maybe collaborate on something like this would be interesting.
Yeah, and I think I would echo like everything that all of my other panelists have said has been kind of exactly what I was thinking as well. But to take it another perspective, I think that, like Tommy mentioned, like having those additional classes and focusing on ethical supply chain and whatnot, but like I'd love to see additional research done in that area and just done in the supply chain, if you will, of this matter, because it just doesn't really exist to the level of detail that, I mean, it's heartbreaking to do the research, but how do you solve a problem if you don't have every aspect of what goes into it? And so we saw a lot of more genericized or summary level views of, trafficking across, like from a global perspective or from a US perspective. And granted, we were in Romania, which is a much smaller country, but I think having maybe an Eastern European view, a Western European, like having those different views and doing research into more of the details and kind of the nitty gritty, if you will, of what exactly goes into that supply chain. And then we could tie in the ethical component and the sustainability as well. So I think that once you have a deeper picture in terms of what is out there, it could open some doors into additional areas of partnerships as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone. And so now we will take some audience questions. The first is from Sister Anne, and it's directed first of all to Ella, but I think it could also be relevant to a lot of to other presenters as well. And she's asking, does your club address how young adults or graduates can remain involved as they integrate what they have learned and begin to enter their chosen profession?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think we do try to draw in everyone. We make it pretty clear to everyone that we're not an undergraduate only club. That is obviously the bulk of our membership just based on where we are. But we have had graduate students be involved in the past. We've had professors who've acted in advisory positions as well. And we've even had community members from the South Bend area attending events too. So we try to make it really open in everything we do. And beyond this, yeah, we do try to focus on organizations that offer different volunteer opportunities as well, keeping in mind that like most of us are here for a limited period of time. We're often moving on. So organizations like, I think you brought this up in your question, the U.S. Sisters Against Human Trafficking, Talitha Kumi, there's any number. And both of those organizations we actually had come speak for our organization last semester. So part of it is spotlighting organizations that already do this work and showing how people are moving forward to allow people a multitude of opportunities in which they can potentially help out or donate their time or money or energy in any way.
Okay, thanks. And Aaron, Mark, or Tommy, did you have any thoughts about ways people could be involved, especially students as they go out and enter their careers?
I would certainly make a case for students to get involved while they're on campus with our Trademark Licensing and Human Rights Committee. There's opportunity there for sure to really learn more about what we're doing from a licensing standpoint. And then there's also some really good student engagement programs with the Fair Labor Association that I know that I've worked with a student as part of that program in the past and would like to continue to do that. I think that's a great opportunity for students to really learn.
Yeah, I would say maybe coming from a slightly different perspective. Not too long ago, I was looking for companies to work for after graduating. And granted, I was in a graduate program versus an undergraduate program, and I'm not 100% sure if the audience is part of that cohort or not. But I would say to students who are looking to get involved even after they've graduated, when you're looking at companies to work for, lots of companies promote their various charitable acts or foundations that they're involved with. And I would say that it's becoming more and more relevant for companies to engage in certain areas that they feel really passionate about. And so don't be afraid to look for companies that work in this area. You might be surprised at some of the efforts that larger companies or smaller companies have in different areas of human trafficking or sex trafficking or that type of work. And if you find a company that you would really like to work for that also, engages in that type of charitable work, I promise you that they'll have a way for you to be involved whenever you get to your job. I know that the company I work for right now does a lot of work in different areas, and they're always asking for people to volunteer and be active. So that's definitely a way you can make an influence in your career, at least, that I found personally.
Yeah, I think that another area is that I think we can all acknowledge that at least as students, we are only in South Bend and working with these organizations or programs like Thoughtful or like Ella's organization for a finite amount of time. So I think that as we look to transition into our postgraduate careers and experiences, both like Mark said, in terms of finding companies that have values that align with yours, but also finding organizations that are in your local area. So I moved up to New York and I'm in the process of figuring out exactly where I can plug in and be and serve in this area. And I think that we could possibly, our programs, both thoughtful and otherwise on campus, could do a service in terms of saying, oh, here's some really great organizations in some big prominent cities, not like every city across the states, but like places that students, a lot of places, or like a lot of students go to, so New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and saying, here are some really great organizations or some, whether it be nonprofits or companies that you could work with. So I think that we could work to get a better interaction between those on campus, and then realizing that for many of us, our time on campus does come to an end, and still wanting to continue that work whenever we get to wherever we're going.
Okay, thanks. So one question then pertains to something we've addressed a couple different times throughout the series about the relationship between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And many people find in a lot of different scenarios that the two wind up being interrelated. People who are trafficked for labor are vulnerable to sex trafficking, and sort of vice versa. And so someone is asking, how does that relationship show up in your work? Do you focus on one more than the other, or how do you see that interrelationship showing up?
I can jump on that first, if that's okay, Mark. If you want to go, you're welcome to. I would say that we try to focus on both equally, and that's for two reasons. One is that the structures of both are very similar. So those cycles that you were seeing Mark and Aaron outline in their presentation, that tends to go, at least at some level, there's similarities between the two. And the other reason is, again, when there's one form of trafficking going on, there's usually some form of another happening as well, just based on the way that this profit system works. So when we're some of our events are specifically focused on sex trafficking, depending on the organization that we're working with at the time. And then some events are focused on labor trafficking. That's especially if we're talking about being a conscious consumer. That does tend to focus on labor trafficking much more than sex trafficking. So we do try to focus on both just because we have to. There's no way to address one without addressing the other. Although that said, there is definitely room for diving deeper into each topic. So I'll pass it on to Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of what you said, I 100% agree with. And the one thing I wanted to add was, it's interesting that you bring up the relationship between labor and sex trafficking, because in building that Excel model that we showed you, we specifically and intentionally did not include labor trafficking into that model, because it would just make it so complex that we wouldn't be able to wrap our minds around it. But we fully understood that there was a massive degree of labor trafficking that's heavily associated with sex trafficking, especially as you get younger in age. At least in Romania, and the work that the interviews that we had done, we had experienced a lot of, or not experienced, but had researched a lot about really young children being like asked to be beggars or work on the street in that sense, which is a form of labor trafficking, maybe not a typical form or widespread, but and a lot of those people that get recruited at a young age end up moving into sex trafficking when they become a little bit older. And then there's kind of like a very gruesome cycle that happens where you move into the sex trafficking world, and then when you become too old, then you all of a sudden become a recruiter to recruit other people who are younger, and it's just like a vicious cycle. But we did specifically choose not to include labor trafficking because we wanted to focus on sex trafficking for our work, and it was a little bit easier to wrap our minds around one topic versus trying to boil the ocean there.
And Tommy, I assume then that your focus is on labor trafficking. Does it include sex trafficking at all, or do you have to sort of take a similar approach where you have to focus on the one for what you do?
Yeah, if I'm being perfectly honest, I haven't come across a situation of sex trafficking, but certainly labor trafficking, and particularly right now with the issue that we're facing in Xinjiang, and the transporting of individuals from the internment camps and forcing them to work in other factories, even outside of the Xinjiang region. So we're definitely seeing that happen and trying to understand it a little bit more.
Okay, thanks. Well, we're approaching the end of our time. I wanted to give everybody one last chance to say a final thought or any final takeaway, or if you have any information about how to connect with your organization that you wanted to share, or to support any work that you think is particularly valuable in this area.
I just want to say thank you for including me in this. I love to talk about the work that we do in licensing, and I don't know if everyone knows the level that we go to on the human rights side of things. I think a lot of times, when people think about licensing, they think about just some T-shirts and keychains that are sold at the bookstore, but there's so much more, obviously, that is behind it, and I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. And I would say that I'll make a plug for our Trademark Licensing and Human Rights Committee, and if there are any students, I know we are looking for more students to get involved. And any questions that anyone has about that or what we're doing in licensing, I am always open to chatting and talking about it. So feel free to contact me.
I would echo everything Tommy said. If you're interested in getting involved with our club, our email is very simple. It's just ijmnd@nd.edu. So you have the two NDs in there. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. Again, please do feel free to reach out. The way we start solving this is by having conversations about it. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just throw in that I was joking with Aaron before we got onto the presentation and the event today that I was like, I'm not sure we're qualified enough to answer some of these questions or explore some of these questions. I think we've done some work in this area through the MBA program in Bothell, but hopefully our answers and the discussions that we've had today were meaningful for the audience. I think the work that we did in Romania was really interesting, and I wish there was more opportunities for us to do that type of work. But I'll throw in a plug for Bothell because I was a teaching assistant for Bothell, so spent 2 years in that program. If you're interested in learning more, I would definitely reach out to Viva, Joe, or Kelly. It's a truly amazing program that's expanding in the MBA school, and I think it's going to be making a huge impact in the years to come. So.
Yeah, and I can just wrap up with, again, thank you all for being here. It's been, we're amongst a great company, and I think that our Mark and I's experience was in fact through Bothell, but I think that even if you aren't a student or you're not a student that is able to participate in that program, there is still an opportunity to get some level of involved, whether or not you're able to actually participate. Like, there's no shortage of work to be done in this space, and I'm sure that Viva and team at Bothell would be happy to get any level of support, any of that. So yeah, and I think that all of us are really looking forward to continuing to do as much as we can in this space.
Thanks so much. So I wanted to take just a brief minute here and remind everybody where we've come and what's available for you if you want to review any of the series. So this is part of the larger collaboration, as you heard in the beginning, between Imago Dei and new organization here at Notre Dame and the Center for Ethical Leadership and the Higgins Labor Program. And we started off with an introduction to the problem of human trafficking by Terry Coonan. And that's a really great introduction to the sort of the full scope of the problem of human trafficking. And then we took a deep dive looking at a few different types of responses to human trafficking. So we looked at law enforcement perspective, a legal perspective, survivor perspective, working in education to spread awareness about this. And then we concluded this evening with our wonderful guests here. So all these talks are recorded and available for you to review and to share and spread the word. So I hope you'll join me in thanking all of our guests. And we will look forward to future collaboration in addressing this issue. Thanks so much.